I just want to say it is such a pleasure and honor to have Julian Barnard here with us today. And it's such a great way to conclude our course on a very, very high note. I will preface this with, we have been talking about your work throughout our course. So the group is familiar with the books you've written. We've talked about the fact that you produce these wonderful remedies. And what I want to say to everyone by way of introduction is that this is a very big deal to have Julian here with us. And Julian is the real deal when it comes to this practice and this work. The first thing is he is a chapter in the history of Bach flower therapy and Bach's legacy. There are a lot of reasons for this, right? Not only for his work in making these remedies for the past 30 years, but also there's another piece that is his work in ensuring access to information about Bach and the history of his work and access to his original writings through publishing the collected works and educating people on how to use the remedies, how to make the remedies. There's so much there that is really hard to summarize in one breath, but it's a very rich story to unpack. And the part for me that's equally extraordinary is the depth and breadth of his scholarship. This is really what made me stop and pay attention, because, anyone can write about the remedies, and most of the work that we find out there, it tells us these are the remedies and this is what they're for and this is how you use them. But Julian brings through this perspective that's the perspective of the historian and the biographer and the naturalist, and there's a little bit of even the artist and the mystic all in one. And I just find it extraordinary and really profound. I haven't seen anything like it anywhere else.
Thank you for that, Linda. And I must say, it's a pleasure to be able to meet with you like this. About 10 or 11 years ago, I decided that I was never going to get into an aeroplane ever again. Now, at that time, Greta Thunberg was still a babe in arms, but you know who I mean, with her advocacy of climate change and care for the planet and so on. And I won't go into all the details of why I decided to do that, but what actually coincided with that decision was the fact that I could talk to people online in this way, and that it has actually improved hugely. And it means that instead of going to one town, whether it's Sacramento or Buenos Aires or wherever it is, you actually can talk to people from all across the world simultaneously. And I find that a kind of, a delight, I think. So if I were to start back where I began with this, in the old days, you could only really learn anything from books. And they didn't have the internet, of course, in my youth. And I should say that they tell me I'm a bit older than I look, but I get well into my 70s now. But when I was a young man and a student and so on, I used to go home to see my parents sometimes at the weekend. And of course, when you're young, you don't really want to talk to your parents, for the whole of the day. So you just leave them to do what they're doing. And my father was a second-hand book dealer, only as a hobby. But then what I used to do would be to go and look through the collection of his books and see what I could find that either drew my attention or was of interest to my study and what I was working on. And one of the books that I found in the shelf and pulled it out was this one. I don't know if you can see that clearly, but this is a facsimile edition of Dr. Bach's book, The 12 Healers and Other Remedies. And so I took it out of the shelf and I looked at it and I thought, I don't know what this is about. It's really strange. I'd never seen anything like it before. And so I was going to put it back into the shelf. And I thought, no, hang on a minute. It says here that the understanding mind will know all this. And I know my friend Joy, she's got an understanding mind, so I'll give the book to her. And that was the first time that I did what is often called the boomerang, which is to throw. I've been given something, and the first thing I did was to throw it away. But in the way of these things, boomerangs come back. And when at that time I was working as a carpenter and decorator, and I would be working for Joy at her house, which is where I got to know her, and we'd stop for coffee and then spend the next hour, instead of working with the paintbrush, try to understand what Dr. Bach's work was about. And that was a really good thing, because I didn't go to university, I didn't have a lecturer. I actually started to learn by talking with somebody else who was interested in more or less the same kind of level as me. Now, it happened that we had a mutual friend who was very unwell and in need of medical attention, but she didn't want to have conventional medical treatment. And among other things that she tried was to work with the Bach flower remedies. So we went down to Mount Vernon to discuss the situation with the person who was then running it, called Nikki Murray. I don't know if you've ever heard her name, but I know that, Linda, you know Nikki Murray. And, well, I would say that was something that kind of changed my life. Now, I've had a book sent to me just recently by a California writer called Heidi Smith. I don't know if any of you know her. When I'm reading this book and she's talking about her life, I think, my goodness, I don't think I can really tell the story like that, because in England or in Britain, we try to be modest and not too much involved with our own story, unless we're the politician like, what's his name, the Prime Minister now. But so I'm going to sort of find it difficult to tell you the story of my life, and yet I've got to tell you aspects of it in order for you to understand where I've been and where I came to. Now, in the 1970s, I wanted to be a writer, and so I wrote and had published a few books. And when I saw this subject with Dr. Bach, I thought, well, what it needs is to be, I mean, this is very presumptuous, isn't it? It needs to be put into the language of my generation, because all this heal thyself and thee this, and, you know, it's so antiquated, I just can't work with it. So I thought, well, I'll sit down and I'll write a book about Bach flower remedies. Now, partly that's what writers do. When you get interested in a subject, you research it and then you write a book about it. And it's a bit cheeky, really, isn't it? But that led me to write a guide to the Bach flower remedies, which was in 1978. And I couldn't get it published because some people thought that I shouldn't be writing about this subject. And if I look back on it now, I would say, well, I'm really a bit willful. If you tell me you can't do something, then that's exactly what I'm going to do. That's a naughty boy syndrome. That's what we call it. And I didn't really think that I was interested in Bach flower remedies, and certainly not interested as a therapist. But I went to a talk one evening at the Natural Medicines group, which I was part of in London, and heard a talk from an Australian woman called Dorothy Hall. And she was absolutely amazing, because she was talking about all kinds of disciplines with herbal medicine and acupuncture or anything you like, and about flower remedies. So I said, you know, this is really interesting. But the people who were the herbal experts in London totally ignored this woman. What would a woman come from Australia have to teach us? Was their view. You know, and there is a lot in that question for me, but I might go into that later. But I was talking to her after the talk, and she said, well, come and have a cup of coffee tomorrow morning. So I did. And she said, well, why didn't you come out to Australia? So 3 weeks later, I was in Australia and joined her herbal medicines course. Now, that's a bit of a sudden decision. But then again, sometimes you see an opportunity, you see an open door, and you just go for it. Now, I could say to you individually, I gather you're all involved in homeopathy, is that right? But why homeopathy, and when did it start? I suspect that's going to be a common theme here, which is something happened and it just clicked. Now, I spent a year in Australia and I worked in the clinic which Dorothy ran, and actually took simultaneously both the first year and the second year classes together. And I also worked in the clinic, so I used to see a lot of the people coming in and make up their treatment bottles for them. And we were, I mean, I could keep you here for an hour on that subject. It was very, very interesting. But when I got back to England, which would have been, well, the end of 1980, I didn't think I wanted to be a practitioner. There's many complex reasons behind that. But I decided that I would go and live in the country and pursue a country life. I don't know whether any of you are interested in poetry at all, but do you know W.B. Yeats? Have you heard of him? Yes, you have, Linda. But there's a poem which I remember from when I was at school called The Lake Isle of Innisfree. And just the first verse, I'll read it to you now. I will arise and go now and go to Innisfree, and a small cabin build there of clay and wattles made. 9 bean rows will I have there, a hive for the honey bee, and live alone in the bee loud glade. Now, that was what I decided that I really wanted to do. I was going to have a family and be a beekeeper and take up gardening. And I wasn't interested in a career. I just really wanted to, I suppose, to experience nature, not through books, but with my hands in a real sense. And you could say now, if you were that age, well, I mean, you can't do that kind of thing. Well, I could. I don't know how, but I could. And my generation were brought up with that kind of freedom. We just, if you wanted to do something, you went and did it. I've already told you. I just walked out 3 weeks later. I went to the passport office in Australia House to get my visa, and they said, you can't just come in here, mate. You just, you know. I said, no, I think it's up there. And Dorothy knew somebody who was a politician who'd got my visa within 10 days. And when he came down, he said, oh, I'm so sorry, Mr. Barnard. I didn't realize who you were. Well, I wasn't anybody, but when the door opens, that's what it is. So you may think I'm mad, but then one day I met up again with Nicky Murray, and that was another moment that just changed my life, because Nicky invited me to come and work with her and take up a role with education and with teaching, partly because she knew that I had written this book and that I was a student and I'd done this work in Australia. And I think she knew more about my future than I did, if that makes sense. So if you read what Edward Bach himself writes, I don't know how much of you, have you read collected writings and all his stuff like Heal Thyself and Free Thyself? Some of you have, maybe. Yeah, a bit. But one of the things was that much of what he wrote was out of print in the 1980s. And I thought that was wrong. And I brought up with the idea that you can't alter somebody else's work. That it stands, I don't know, like stones of reality. And when I read and found a copy of Free Thyself, that sounds like what I want. I want to be free. And chapter 10 of Free Thyself has the sort of chapter heading, To Gain Freedom, Give Freedom. Now, this may not be what you're expecting to hear, but I'm trying to tell you honestly and truthfully what have been the themes in my life which have led me to do or take action in the way that I have. And when I looked back and started to study what had happened, the sort of the perspective of history, I discovered that after Dr. Bach died in 1936, he handed over the work to his colleague Nora Weeks and Victor Bullen, and they set up the Bach Center. And with the help of one or two other people that I also met, they managed to buy the place and to set up a trust fund and to publish books. And because I was interested in books, I certainly went to meet the publisher, didn't I? I mean, that's what you do, go and talk to people. And I thought it was wrong that a lot of Bach's ideas and things that had been written by Nora Weeks were being what I can only call censored and suppressed. So one of the things I did was to create this book, The Collected Writings of Edward Bach. And that actually has everything in it that Edward Bach himself wrote. And it's not very widely available, but it is the definitive book on a collection of his writings. And then I started to look into this, and I thought this is really strange because in his book, Edward Bach tells everybody how to make the remedies. Did you know that? Method of preparation. 2 methods are used to prepare these remedies, the sunshine method. And he writes, a thin glass bowl is taken and almost filled with the purest water obtainable, if possible from a spring nearby. The blooms of the plant are picked and immediately floated on the surface of the water so as to cover it, and then left in the bright sunshine for 3 or 4 hours. And I thought, well, he told you how to do this. And actually, Nora Weeks told you how to do it. I haven't got a copy with me here, but she wrote this book called Bach Flower Remedies, Illustration and Preparation. Okay, that's an updated version of it, but I have the original ones before it was withdrawn from the market. So I thought, well, I don't think that's right. So I'm going to write a book telling everybody how to make Bach Flower Remedies. And I did that, and it was called The Healing Herbs of Edward Bach. And I published it myself in 1988. At the time, we had no money, so we mortgaged the children and sold everything we had. And so that was meant to be a joke. You can't mortgage children in the UK. I don't know if you can do that in America. But that book got me into a lot of trouble. I'm not going to say much more about it than that. But it was, to me, essential that to understand where Bach had been and why he did what he did. And there were 2 fundamental questions. One, why did he choose these flowers that he chose for his Bach Flower Remedies? And then the next question, which is much more complex, but is, how do they work? You know, you take the remedy, how does it work? Now, of course, by that time, I'd had a set of remedies for quite some time. And I used to give them to my family and give them to my friends. And actually, at the time, this was in the 70s, before I went to Australia, I had a dog, and I used to give them to my dog. And the dog used to say, "Ooh, why did you take them yourself?" I never thought of that. If you could get that one. But the dog didn't want to take the remedies, but the dog definitely told me, if you want to study this subject, you take the remedies, and that way you learn what they're about. So I started taking them for a week, A for agrimony, B for aspen, you know, whatever it was. And of course, at a certain point, the question came up, well, what happens when you make a remedy? And in the way of these things, and I won't tell you the story, but I found in an antique shop, 2 or 3 thin glass bowls, which are exactly the type that Dr. Bach used. And so, well, where did that go? When I came back from Australia, I thought, no, I don't really want to have anything to do with this, because all the conflict and argument that was around it and the control, and I can't bear controls, made me think, oh, I'd do something else, which is why the Lake of Innisfree, you see. Sorry, I'm jumping about a bit, but Then I realized that where I'd gone to live was actually just down the road from where Dr. Bach had gone to find the first 3 remedies in Krakow. So even that action, if you like, led me to the place where he had walked. And I could see, because he'd drawn a map, right? I mean, I could show you all these things so you can get them online. So I could walk in the footsteps along the side of the river and walk up where he said, this is the mimulus field here. And I could see the impatiens plants. And just down the road coming into Krakow, there was the clematis still growing there. Well, that was kind of like another moment where you thought, well, hang on a moment, what are you seeing? What are you being shown? And that's when I started to really study the plants, to try and understand why he had attributed to those individual species the description of the emotional state of the individual person. And it's drawn me to the conclusion, and it stood well from my point of view for, I don't know, well, nearly 40 years, that there's a correspondence, an equivalence between the plant and the person and the plant. And that started with Bach himself, who was a tense and irritable person, very much a loner, directed with his own intentions. And he said originally, with his description for impatiens, also it's a remedy for pain. So he was physically in pain, but also mentally in pain. And when he, in September 1928, walked along the River Usk and found the impatiens flowers there, they were mostly by that time in seed. And he held out his hand and touched one of the seeds, and it exploded in his hand. Did you know this? If you go onto the website, the Bach Educational Resource, you can see we made films and talks and lectures about all of this story. And you can see it for yourself and see what you think. But when you have that experience, you're suddenly in contact with the plant in a different way to what you are in contact with when you read a book or read an account of something. And it was that immediacy that led me into this journey of discovery. One of the things that also happened about this time was that I came into conflict over this question of what's called intellectual property. I don't know if you know about trademark law and that kind of thing, maybe. Well, the last thing that I would know about would be that sort of stuff. But that's what I'm now actually an expert on international law. I mean, it's crazy, isn't it? But one of the things is whenever you go online and enter trademarks and patents in Google, you'll see how it works. But since you're homeopaths, you'll know that Hahnemann never made a secret of his discoveries. In actual fact, he got into a lot of trouble. I've forgotten which city it was in now in Germany, but he got in trouble with the pharmacists because he told people how to make their own remedies. Well, you can't do that, we'll be out of a job. And so they actually turfed him out for one thing alone, that he shared the information freely among anybody who was interested. Now, I'm going to tell you a silly thing now, but just to entertain you, right? I don't want you getting bored, Vinny. Do you know, you've heard of, I'm sure, the mafia? But actually, there are 4 mafias. The primary mafia is the armaments industry. Because if you want to sell guns and weapons, you have to have a war. And you have to have massive government funding to make your money. And that's the way that the drawdown from the natural resources of every nation is taken. The second mafia is the pharmaceutical industry. With this COVID-19, it's going to be compulsory to have the vaccination. Now, whatever your views on that are, but the pharmaceutical and the drugs industry, they are, from my point of view, exactly the same. They may be looking to do good, but actually there's not enough freedom in that process and not enough freedom of choice. I'll say more about that in a moment. The third mafia, people never get. Guess the third mafia. No idea? It's easy. It's Visa. Well, maybe you don't use Visa in the States, but the credit card companies, they take 2.5% to 3% of every transaction that's in the world. I mean, hang on a minute. That's a lot of money. And the fourth mafia, well, that's the mafia, but we don't worry about them. So, what I'm going back over this ground again now with this reference from Dr. Bach with to gain freedom, give freedom. Now, if you take that literally, if you want freedom for yourself, you have to give freedom to other people, unless you're going to be part of the mafia and in the control setup. And then you'll always be watching your back because somebody else will try and take your freedom away from you that way. But Bach really was talking about the journey which we individually take to learn our own soul purpose, what we're really alive to do and for. And that's going to be a journey of discovery. It's not going to be knowing what you already know. It's going to be a journey of discovery. And that's what knowledge is about. Real knowledge is what you learn. And he calls this to follow the journey of the soul's purpose. And basically, his view is that if you are following that, you'll be okay. Okay, you may not have 100% health, but you will be okay. And if you're not okay, there's a very strong likelihood that you're not really following your life purpose. You're in conflict with yourself in some way. But, I mean, I was saying about the pharmaceutical industry, there's a lot of attack been going on for some decades now of attacks that anything we're involved is pseudoscience. And it's an attack on any form of alternative. Now, you said, can you record this? So I may not be here next week because they'll probably come and get rid of me for saying these kind of crazy things. But I'm getting to the age where I'm going to be more outspoken about what I believe and what I don't believe. So actually, this control of ideas, of any idea that's not making money for the mafia, is what I think is actually running our society at the moment. Now, actually, if I think about it, the fifth mafia. I said there were four, but actually the fifth one. And the fifth mafia in my book is science itself. The very idea that you can control what children learn and you must control it in order to make them obedient is absolutely contrary to everything that I've experienced in life. I mean, I don't know if any of you know about Waldorf schools and Steiner education. Yep, okay. But I mean, I was a Steiner teacher, a Waldorf teacher for a while. And I had a young lad who came to work for me. He was a neighbor of ours. And he told me that he was studying, I think, A-level physics, actually. And his physics master said to him one day, or to the class one day, what cannot be weighed and measured is not real. It doesn't exist. So Joe, this witty young lad, said, so the laws of science, sir, they don't exist because you can't weigh, you can't measure a law of science. Well, they gave him a bad time for that and he failed his exams, but that's the price you pay for being funny. I'm not critical of questioning or investigation, but facts are not always what they appear to be. There was a man called Professor Ernst at Exeter University some years ago, and he got in touch with me to fund and supply remedies for a double-blind placebo trial that they were running down there. And I said, yeah, come on then, we'll do that. And it was a 7-day trial to establish whether or not using Bach flower remedies, you know what a double-blind placebo trial is, I take it. If you don't, I'll explain. But whether or not that would help exam stress. Now, this was not a combination for exam stress, but they were using the rescue, or what we call 5-flower combination. And when they got the stats back, there was a real peak of change for people on day 3. And they said, oh, it's a statistical aberration because this is a 7-day trial and therefore it has no meaning. Yeah, I get your face, sorry. But you look shocked. Yeah, it's pretty shocking. But this was a man who was using science to disprove alternatives, and that's actually what he was paid for, and paid for by the drug industry. Now, I can prove what I've said to you because I've got all the information because I paid for the project. And then you start to think, well, hang on a minute, what is your agenda? What are you really trying to establish? Now, I mean, maybe this is not what you want to talk about, so I'd like to just pass that up. You asked me to tell you a little bit about myself, and I've tried to be open and clear in doing that. Whether that's good or right or whatever, I can't say. When I come before my maker, I'll be told. Or do I feel that actually I've led an interesting path in this? Yes, I do. And both my children are postdoctoral scientists. So, you know, whatever it was that they had from me, it wasn't that. But maybe that's how things work. You know, you go by reverse. Who's to say?
Yeah. So, Julian, this is a wonderful story. All this is, you know, what I was hoping, some of what I was hoping you would share with us. And so can I ask you, so I think all of us share your concern about what's happening in the broader landscape. And of course, homeopathy has been a target in just the kinds of activities that you just mentioned. And what about what's happening in the Bach world? Because historically, there have been tensions. And what do you think is the state of things now?
Well, name me a country. California?
Well, interesting to hear what's happening in England, but whatever you want to share about your sense for that.
Well, in the 1990s, because I was being attacked on trademark issues and various people that I knew were being attacked. And when I say attacked, I don't mean that metaphorically. I mean somebody who was working as a practitioner and selling her Bach flower remedies to her trade was told that she can't call them Bach flower remedies and that she should pay. And the lawyers asked for information about all the money that she'd taken. And this would have been probably late 80s, I don't know when, early 90s. And they demanded to have that money as a fine. And this was a woman who was just trying to help people. And that kind of made me cross because I didn't think it was right. And so, I mean, it's a long story, but I ended up taking the owners of the trademarks in the name Bach, B-A-C-H. I took them to court to get the trademark revoked. And that resulted in probably about 12 years of legal tussle. And that's why I haven't got much hair left, you see, because it's all that worry. And we were successful on every count. But now the word Bach, B-A-C-H, or batch, whichever you like to call it, is a generic. That's to say, everybody can use it. you could not trademark the name Hahnemann. You can't. Actually, there are a lot of things you can't trademark, or you shouldn't trademark, like orange. You shouldn't trademark the color orange. But you can. And it's all a question of money and how much you put into persuading the legal system that what you've got is right and yours rightfully. And by, I don't know, another of those kind of coincidences, we were successful. I don't know how, but we were. I happened to get really good lawyers, and the man who represented me in High Court, a man called Jeffrey Hobbs, I think he just looked at it and he wasn't very interested. He wasn't interested in alternative medicine. He just didn't like to see an offense against moral law. And so that came to an end basically in the High Court. It ended up going to the Supreme Court. So we had to sit through 3 years or 2 or 3 years of legal procedures, first with one judge, then with 3 judges, and then with 3 more who are all the lawyers in the House of Lords, all with gowns and stuff. And it's quite fun. And well, we won. Is that what you were asking me? I can't remember.
Yeah, I think that's part of it. And where are we now? Has anything shifted since all that?
Yes, it has, because now there are probably hundreds and hundreds of people making flower remedies. And some of them are making their own stuff. Some of them are making Bach flower remedies. And they're being produced and sold in 5 continents of the world. I mean, I won't say that's been me alone, but that's part of the wave of freedom. That's the way I see it. And I don't really want to talk a lot about the individual makers and the details of what's what, because, as I say, I think it's a journey of discovery. And if you're not doing it in order to learn, then I don't know why you're doing it. It must be for money, I suppose. Oh, that's what the mafia do, don't they? Yeah, I think they do.
So does anyone have question or comments? I have so many questions, but I would love for the group if you have any thoughts or.
I have one for Julian. Hi, Julian. Sorry, I joined late. Do you have any experience or knowledge of how homeopathy works with the Bach flowers? I know we've talked about it as a group, but I'm just curious to hear from your experience how the two go together, or do they not?
Generally speaking, homeopaths don't like to work with other modalities. Now, that may not be true of you, or it may not be true of America, but certainly when I come upon this in the past, that's been somewhat the kind of attitude. And as far as my attitude with flower remedies is concerned, you can take flower remedies with anything you like. It doesn't really make any difference at all. Sometimes people say, can you take it if you're taking drugs? Well, you may find that see, when you're taking a drug, it's an alterative substance, if you know what I mean by that. And when you're taking a flower remedy, you're actually receiving information. Now, basically, it's the same with homeopathy, but that information isn't quite so straightforward, because when you're taking an attenuated dose, it's actually going to have an alterative effect on your system, which is why sometimes in homeopathy you talk about having an adverse reaction. Now, I'm not taking a view one way or the other about that, and I actually, because I'll give you an anecdote about homeopathy. When, I can't remember just what it was I started, but I went to see a homeopath for some particular problem, doesn't matter what. And I think I was given M. potency tuberculinum. Now you'll say, oh, yeah, I know all about him now. But my point of myself is not what's that for, but what actually happened when I took it. Because let's say I took it on the Monday morning And this was Tuesday morning or maybe Wednesday morning, a couple of days later. And I got up and I went to the bathroom to clean my teeth. And I suddenly was aware that this child was standing beside me in short trousers. And I'd only just got out of bed. And I was living alone in the house at the time. And I couldn't see him, but I could feel him. And he started following me around. And then I suddenly realized that that wasn't a stranger, that was me. Now, you may say I'm making this up, but I promise you, I swear to God, this is what I experienced. And so I went to work as usual, and he started to follow me down the path to the offices. And I thought after, let's say, 3 or 4 hours of this, I can't just have this child follow me around all the time. It just wasn't right. So I decided, metaphorically or literally, I don't know which, to pick him up and carry him in my arms. And slowly over the next, I don't know how many, it was a long time ago now, but let's say the next 6 hours or the next day, he actually turned into like a sun, S-U-N, a light, and just kind of became absorbed into me, back into me. And that was such a transformative experience. I mean, I can promise you, I've never told this story to a group of people before, but if you're homeopaths, you might find that interesting. Because what really was the stimulus for that? I mean, it wasn't an alterative thing. Okay, M potency is quite high, but it was like, I don't know, it was just like, well, I just simply think it was reintegration. Now, I'm not alone in having the need to reintegrate with my child, whatever that may mean to you. So in that case, taking that remedy wasn't an adverse effect, it was just information, but it was coming at really quite a high level, but then that's what you'd expect, or I would expect with a high potency remedy. And it must have been that I was just in the right place to receive it. Now, I mean, I take flower remedies, and sometimes I usually take them and I get a result within a matter of minutes almost. But then that's because I suppose I'm not saying that I'm clever or subtle or whatever, but I'm so much closely attuned to them that would be second nature to me. Now, if you're really standing way away from that and you're given a remedy that you don't know what it is and you don't know what to expect, and you can very likely block it, I can see from your faces that you know what I'm talking about, then it's like you're having a fight with the information that's coming in, and you may very well have an adverse effect. That said, I, in the past, have had allergies all my life. And I think it's probably what I was having the tuberculinum for, but that's by the by. But if I take a hay fever pill, it has no effect on me whatsoever. So it just depends, doesn't it? It's not quite mechanical. So it's more of an art than a science in my view.
Julian, can I ask you about this topic of aggravations in relation to Bach flower remedies? I've heard two sides of the story, right? Some will say, no, they will not cause aggravations or adverse effects, and others say, absolutely, they can and often do.
In my experience, they don't. That's just my experience. I've heard this argument. And actually, somebody got in touch with me last week asking specifically about this. And I don't know all the details. He said he got the remedies from a friend, and he experienced so much of pain from his childhood experience that he couldn't bear it. The way that I describe flower essences as being not a kind of chemical activating substance, because I think they're information. And you say, well, you can't. Information, what is that? You can't weigh it, you can't measure it, as my lad Joe said. Yes, but information can change everything. Information, I mean, let's say what I've just said to you, and then you put your finger up like that, and it was like, wow, because suddenly you realized what was actually your experience. Does it make sense? Now, if that information goes into that chap, and what comes up he doesn't want to hear, then definitely he can try and suppress it. That's what we call it. And the way to suppress some things is to have a headache, or to, I mean, I shouldn't do this really, but when I talk like this, suddenly an idea flashes up in my mind, just as it did to you, right? And my mother used to suffer from migraine. Now, I must at some point in my life have had a headache, but I don't remember it, right? But if you get migraine and you get stressed, boy, you will really know about it. And it can be a very difficult thing to deal with. But the correlation between the stress and the migraine is something that nobody seems to connect. You see what I'm saying? And so when we talk about an adverse reaction, what it might mean is what my friend used to say, I don't wish to know that, kindly leave the stage. I'm not listening to you. No, 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 no. I'm not listening, I'm not listening. And what we say about messages, after all, is the best one is just to whisper and say, are you listening, Julian? Listen, Julian. And I'm not paying any attention at all, not listening. Julian, I'm talking to you, Julian. Tap on the shoulder, Julian. Right? Now, if that is the way that the soul, if you like, is Bach's term, or the higher self, or the cosmos, or God, or whatever else you want to call it, communicates, and we don't listen, then we may very well find ourselves in a conflicted situation. And that, from Dr. Bach's point of view, is the origin of illness. I'll say it again, sorry, but from Dr. Bach's point of view, the origin of illness is a conflict between the inner self and the individual ego. And that will manifest itself, first of all, in the mind and in the heart, if you like. And then it will feed, if we don't change, it will feed through into the body. Now, whenever we have a pandemic, boy, have we got one now, so I'm told, what is the first thing that is going to make you really susceptible? I can tell you, panic, intense fear and panic. And then living in a careless way, that definitely is going to lead you into trouble. Well, that's no secret there. When I was a little boy, my mother used to say to me, go and wash your hands and lay the table. That's what I always had to do. Does that make sense? Do you know what I mean? Because we used to sit down at the table together to eat a meal. Well, people don't do that anymore. They'll go takeaways and they just eat in the street. Do you wash your hands before you have your hamburger? No, why would I do that? Okay, but that's hygiene. It's so simple. But the next thing is, whenever we have a pandemic, whether it's the Black Death or the plague or the Spanish flu in the 1920s, why is it that some people get it and some people are immune? Nobody knows. And they certainly don't know how to research that question. Well, I mean, I could go on about this for days, I won't. But because we're actually more interested in having illness than we are in actually avoiding illness.
Say more.
Both as a society, but also as, look, I'm not going to talk about America because that would be impolite. But there's now an announcement in the UK that 50%, no more than 50%, I think maybe even 70% of adult males are overweight or obese. Now, do you know what a BMI is, a body mass index? Okay, you do. You take your height and your weight, and then you multiply that to get a body mass index, which is what we would call safe. Now, do you think there's any correlation? See, you shouldn't get me started on this. Do you think there's any correlation between what we eat and the health of the body? Yeah, I suppose there could be. Maybe that's a factor. Do we pay any attention to that in a national sense? Absolutely not. Because now into the sixth mafia, which is McDonald's. Sorry, I shouldn't have mentioned that. Dad, stop that recording, please. I only said that one because you'd know who I meant.
Yeah.
So there has to be an integrated process of understanding health. And for people to understand that, they have to begin to understand, who am I and what is happening in my life?
Yeah.
I don't really mind whether you approach that through therapy, through acupuncture, homeopathy, Bach flower remedies, ballet, anything. It doesn't matter.
Right. So, Julian, I'm curious. I'm going to take you in another direction. This is the perfect audience for this kind of conversation, by the way. And I'm quite certain that everyone is resonating with every word you're sharing. And I'm curious about what has your energy and attention now. I mean, I think that's the first part of the question. And in your work, in your life, and also what is it like, you know, a day in the life of Julian Barnard? I mean, it's like, do you wander the country looking for flowers? Like, what is your, you know, what does it mean to do the work that you do?
I do get quite a number of phone calls. I don't see people professionally, but sometimes they ring up these days, and I'll just listen to what they have to tell me, really. So your question, what takes my energy and my attention in life? Well, it depends which day we're talking about and what's going on. I don't know. I don't know from one day to the next what's going to happen. In fact, I mean, how could I possibly have guessed that this is where you would lead me now? I couldn't. So at the present time, well, some years ago, I decided I couldn't take the pressure anymore of living in the way that I was. It was about 8-9 years ago. Because having been through those battles that I told you a little bit about, then there were always people throwing stuff at me, metaphorically or metaphysically. And I just needed to step away somehow. And then I had a dream one night. Well, why not? And then I thought, okay, I'm going to follow that. I'm going to do it. And on any given day, wherever I am, whether I'm here or in Herefordshire, I will always look at everything that's around me, because I just observe stuff. If that's what we say, what takes the energy and attention. And I You guys were talking earlier about whether you're cold and cloudy or hot and dry and all this. And the seasonal variation will change the way that the plants grow. And I mean, what are those flowers behind you there, Linda, the orange flowers?
They're not real.
Oh, you won't learn much by observing them. But I'm a beekeeper, among other things. Now, you might guess from the things that I've been saying earlier that I'm not going to be an intrusive beekeeper, and I will go to them and ask them, well, how are you guys today? When I started keeping bees about 40 years ago, I followed all the instructions from the books and the people tell you how to do it. And I'd take them to pieces and I'd do this and I got stung for my trouble. And these days, I'd never open the hive unless I've got a real need to do so. And I leave the bees to get on and lead their own life. And this year and last year and the year before, I've had so much honey, I don't know what to do with it. And why do I keep bees? Because I never lose interest in observing what they're doing, because I learn from it. I don't know how to explain that except by saying the same thing over again. But I'd say the same about plants and the way that they're affected seasonally by the conditions. So which flowers come this year and which ones don't. But then equally, because I'm an essence maker, I spend every day looking at the weather maps to try and understand whether or not it's going to be a suitable day for making a remedy today. So you've got to match the observation of the plant with the conditions and circumstances that are suitable for making that essence. Now, on which day? Monday, I think. When I woke up in the morning, it was absolutely beautiful, clear blue skies, not a cloud in sight. So I thought, okay, I'll try it. Now, as making the essences, I have to prepare myself before I go to do it by clearing. Well, I put on clean clothes, I wear a white shirt, but that's almost like a symbol for clearing your mind. The last thing I would take with me when I go essence making would be a mobile phone, because the last thing I want is to be thinking about something else. And in fact, several times this year, I've not gone to make essences because the mental confusion caused by this COVID crisis is such that I couldn't really clear my head. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. So I got the bowls, I got the water, and I did it and set it going. And just as I put the last of the flowers in, the clouds came up. They weren't meant to be there, but they suddenly appeared. So actually, I had to throw it away, because that's what I do. And it's very frustrating if you set out and you want to do something and you are prevented from it. But then I would say, well, that's part of the process of learning, that you must accept things as they are rather than the way you want them to be. And I could say the same about gardening because I grow all my own vegetables. So I'm very fortunate that I live in places where I've got access to ground and, all of that. And I've had a very, very fortunate life. And I hope maybe it's still a fortunate life. Why? I don't know. Why am I lucky? Tell me. I don't know.
Is you're following the calling of your soul? Would you say that?
I would say that. I think that's a factor in it. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I think that's a factor in it.
Yeah. So Julian, go ahead.
Well, you never know when it's going to change, do you?
Mm-hmm. So just briefly, I want to give others a chance, but can you just tell us the flowers that you're looking for? Are these on your property? Do you just go and have access to other areas?
Well, if you go onto, I think it's maybe on YouTube, but it may be on our website as well. Mm-hmm. Yeah, because I'm a photographer, among other things. So I've taken pictures of all the flowers, and we make films, and there's a film there about essence making, but you can see it doesn't, it's not 10 minutes or something, I don't know. When in 1980 I came back from Australia, I had some friends who had just moved out of London and they were living up the road in Herefordshire, in rural Herefordshire. And so I went to see them. Well, 3 weeks or three months later, they left and went back to London because they couldn't bear it in the country. So I thought, well, that's very lucky for me that, that they were there and that I was led to this place. And I just looked at it and I thought, yeah, this is a good place to live. I'd like it. And I went down the road to meet to one of the people. This is out in the country. There's just like farms, nothing else, right? And I saw this house which was empty and said, well, could I rent it? Would that be all right? And I said, no, we don't want to do that. We don't want to do that. It was a rundown place. There was no glass in the windows and plastic bags over the windows and so on. And I don't know why. I just thought it would be a good place to live. And it turned out that somebody who was a neighbor of them actually knew who I was by some means and persuaded them that I should live there. And at the time, that was just like good fortune. And then that was 1981. And at the time, I had no idea what I was going to do. But I ended up buying an old barn that was there, which I didn't have any money for, but Nikki Murray gave me some money because she wanted me to set up what I ended up doing. And then all the people who work at Healing Herbs are actually my neighbors in that village. So when somebody says, I want a job, whether it's Joe, who's just up the road, and he's gone now, but he was a boy, or whatever, I only ask 2 questions of the people who come. And the first question is, do you like work? But if you don't like work, I'm not interested in you. And the other question is, are you discreet? Because you're going to have to deal with some sensitive information and think about what you're doing and what you're involved in. And most of the people at Healing Herbs have been employed there for more than, I think actually the average now is more than like 22 years. Young and old together. I mean, some of them are in their late 80s. But I don't know, does it make sense? I mean, it's crazy, isn't it? But we're a community. So by bringing them on to manage the work, and they know better than I do, not the essence making, but the manufacturing and the dealing with it. And the more responsibility I give to them, the more I can step away and be free for myself. So I give them freedom in order to gain freedom. Does that sound familiar? And I don't know from day to day what's the next thing to do. I mean, at the present time, it's kind of, you wake up in the morning and you think, oh God, I can't stand any more of this chaos, because it's so difficult to know how to manage it. And that's my experience. But then again, I have an interesting afternoon talking to people like you, and I think I'm so lucky. So that's enough of that.
If I may have a question.
Of course.
I went to your website and I think you have the sucrose versions of the remedies.
Yes.
And I don't know if you would be willing to share actually how you do it, because we were wondering if we could prepare remedies without alcohol and we couldn't figure it out.
Okay. In the UK, there's a homeopathic company called Helios. You know them? Okay. Well, I got to know them, well, before even I started the business. So when I wanted to make, or people were asking me to have sugar granules, they made some for me. But two things happened. One was that actually supplying them was too much work for me, given the other things that I was trying to do. And the other thing was that they said, look, we can't cope with this anymore because we're too busy doing homeopathic stuff. So, okay, fair enough. And we let it go. And then the subject came up again with our business in Germany. And I said, well, look, we can't supply you with this stuff. You have to find me somebody who knows what they're doing. And I went in Germany and went to talk to this person and explained what the problem was. And we decided between us exactly how it could be done. And so I did a double-blind placebo trial, which was, I had some bottles. I think there were 5 of them, and 2 of them had remedy treatment and 3 didn't, something like that. And I said, well, if I can tell the difference, which one's which, then I'll believe it works. And I could, so I went with it, because that's empiricism, isn't it? And what these people were doing, because they were making homeopathic remedies anyway, they were able to show me that they made it on a metal tray, which had been, steam baked. Because temperature is the thing that can eliminate the inflammation. And I know that because when I'm making with the glass bowls, I put the bowls in boiling water for 20 minutes, which is what was originally devised for this. So by cleaning the utensils for the first instance, you're actually getting rid of past inflammation. Then you put your granules or sugar granules, whatever it is, into that tray, and you can treat it with the flower remedies in whatever way you want to do it. Now, because we make them in brandy, so we'd want to have enough brandy, so we'd put some stock drops into a larger quantity of brandy and spray it across the tray, stir it all, and then put it in an oven to bake off the alcohol. So then, but you've got to be very careful what kind of granules you use. But then if that works okay, you go back again and repeat the dosing of the granules a second time. Because one of the problems with putting 2 drops in a 10 ml vial and shaking it is you won't necessarily get even coverage to all the granules. And so that's why I told them, look, I want you to do this twice. And they said, okay, we can do it twice. So they did. And I don't use the granules myself. Well, I'm not against it because I think there is some quality of information there, but I don't think it's clear and as strong as taking the liquid form, because I think the information is more readily retained in a liquid form. That's part of the quality of liquid. But that's about it. And if you want to try it, then you try it. Easy. Why not? I mean, in the States, from the beginning, really, we've never tried to directly import our product into the USA. And partly the reason for that is that the USA don't like allowing imports. And the second reason is that actually it's still against the law to send alcohol through the post in the USA. I discovered this to my cost one time when I sent 2 large bottles of mother tincture into the USA, and the customs people poured them down the drain because they said it's alcohol. And I thought, wow, that's teaching you. So we've always worked with the Flower Essence Society. So they're in Nevada City, and I've known of Richard and Patricia for a very long time. They were one of the people who started to be attacked in the early 80s. And because of that attack was one of the reasons that I went on the path that I did. because I thought it was fundamentally wrong. And I've been to see them, and I know their work, and I respect them, and I respect their work, and therefore I knew that I could trust them to prepare the healing herbs, Bach flower remedies, in the way that I thought they should be done, and with the proper protocols and so on. And we've done that for, I don't know, certainly 25 years. So they use the name Healing Herbs, but it's in association with flowers and services.
So Julian, just so I'm clear, are they producing their own version? So they're not receiving mother tincture or stock from you?
They've always received mother tinctures and stock from me.
Okay, so that's what they're doing, and they're repackaging?
Yeah, well, they don't receive the stock. They actually receive the mother tinctures. And then they use California biodynamic brandy, or whatever they call it there. One of the things that I've had to learn is you can't do everything yourself. But if you're going to work with people, you've got to work with people that you trust. And I've never had any cause to doubt that. I mean, obviously, they're more interested in their work and their own remedies than they are in Dr. Bach, but they know that there's a link with Dr. Bach, so that seems to be pretty good. And, I mean, there are people making essences of one kind or another all over the world these days. They don't all have to be following, well, they don't all have to be making Bach flower remedies. Me, I only make Bach flower remedies. That's my job. But if you wanted to make gemstone remedies and you thought that was good, provided you do so in a sensible way and don't kind of tell lies or fabricate nonsense, what would be wrong with that?
No.
And you can't make medical claims, you know that, I'm sure. But
yeah. Julian, briefly about Canada. We have one person, Aaron, here who's in Canada, and others in our larger group. What's the distribution there?
Well, it's always a bit kind of enigmatic, because I think that you can get stuff from FES in Canada, but that's no means certain. We used to, I don't know if we still do, have a distributor working from Canada, but basically, as a company policy right from the start, if somebody came to me and said, "Can I have this, please?" I would say yes. But I've never gone out of my way to either promote it or market it or try and tell people, you've got to do this and you've got to make those sales this week or else you're going to drop your money. And because we cannot supply the whole world alone. Working with 10 or 12 people in a little village called Walkerstone, we just don't have that capacity. And we don't have the machinery. We're not a machinery thing. I mean, we have machines to do the filling, but it's people who run the machines. And I'm more interested in the people in the process than I am in the production. Because if you, let's say, Erin, you came to work at Healing Herbs, however it happened, you would not be able to work there for, say, 2 or 3 years without learning new skills. Because I'm just not interested in leaving everybody just where they are. I want them to grow. Does that make sense? Because that's what's happened to me. So that's what I want to share with other people. Because, yeah. If I was Dr. Bach, I'd have a clever kind of aphorism for that. To learn, give them information away or something. I don't know what it would be. If you want to learn, share your knowledge.
Yeah. Julian, do you offer visits, tours, anything like that?
Yes, we've always had, I mean, because we've got, you do acres in the States, do you? American acres probably, but we've got right out in the country. And we've got a 5-acre sort of garden. And when people come to visit us, which happens from many different countries on a normal year, you can look around the garden, see the plants, see what's going on. And I'll always be there if I can to talk to you and share any information like we are now. And, you know, if we ever get back to normal, of course, we'd be very, very welcome.
Wonderful. Any other questions?
I was curious about the water that you use in preparation of the remedies, like what effect it has.
You know, that's lovely. Good. What Dr. Bach says was from a nearby spring, right at the beginning. Says, if possible, from a spring nearby. So when I got to this place, Walkerstone, one of the first people who came to work with me was a neighbor called Doreen Howes. And on her farm, there's a spring. So that was kind of a happy coincidence, wasn't it? So that's the spring that I use normally. But also because, you know, I'm sure that rock water is made from a special spring, a holy well. And I thought, well, where am I going to find a holy well? And there's a lot of story in all of this, but I found one up in the mountains. And actually, I was taken there by somebody locally who said, that's on my land, I'll show you where it is. And it's called St. Thomas's Well. And St. Thomas was one of the young monks sent, I think, by Pope Gregory, if I remember rightly, about 600 AD, to go and spread the word of Christianity to the pagans in the West, which was us lot, or not me, but. And so what they did was to adopt the pagan process of realizing that water was sacred. And they would go as a monk to live by the spring and wait for the people to bring them food and nourishment, because the local rituals, or whatever they were, would respect the fact that the water was sacred. But all water is sacred, or should be, if we didn't mess it up. And so then, once they became converted to Christianity, that holy spring or well adopted the name of the priest who had gone to live by it, because that's what the Pope told him to do. Go and find the springs and set up shop there, and you can convert these people to Christianity. Now you may think, is it really like that? Well, yes, it is. Because you know, I'm sure, about the Gothic cathedrals of Western Europe, which were built, but they were as churches in the 8th century, but they were built as cathedrals through the 11th, 12th, and 13th century in the Gothic movement. And in both cases, those cathedrals were built on the site of a sacred spring. Now, I could keep you here for another day talking about architecture, because that's one of my subjects. Architecture and sacred geometry, let's put it like that, is a very informative idea. But so for me, if you're going to start essence making, you've got to start with you've got to find the right place with the right flowers. But before you can go and make the remedy, you've got to find the right water. So in the past, when I used to travel more, let's say I was in Greece and looking to make olive and vine locally, I would search around and find the spring before I located where I was going to find the plants, because I wanted to be sure that I got local, I would say, a sanctuary. The word sanctuary or sanctity, and well, I don't know, there's so many directions of travel on this, but I think I better pull myself back and sit down here again. Do you read books? Any of you? You do. Well, when you read a book, You're getting information and ideas, and that will adapt and modify your perception of the world and lead you into a new adventure when you don't know where that's going to take you. I mean, let's say, I don't know, you're in the supermarket or wherever you go, and you're just next to somebody, and you're reaching out your hand, and what you from a packet or something, it fell onto the floor. And the person right next to you says, oops, no, I'll pick it up for you. And then you see that what she's got in her hand is the same book that you're just reading now. And you say, you're reading Dion Fortune. I've got that book. I'm home. I'm just in the, have you got to chapter 15 yet? And then you have, well, I don't know, but it's really interesting. Should we go and have a cup of coffee? And that meeting changes your life. Or could. Maybe. I didn't say it will, I don't, it just depends. That's what information does. Have we had enough? Or do you want to go on?
I'm dying to ask you this. Since we're talking about books, what are we reading? This is what I'm reading.
Ah, right, okay.
Okay.
Very
And
interesting.
we haven't discussed this in the group, but you have made this available on your website, which is wonderful. I want to all point you to this because this is really cool. I want to tell you, I haven't finished it, but I am fascinated. And I would like to know, so for everyone, this was written by a woman who knew Edward Bach, was involved in some capacity, and it's like a novel, a philosophical novel, that features a figure who resembles Edward Bach. So I'm curious, Julian, how much of the real story do you think is here? Because if that's the case, I am just so intrigued. This is quite fascinating take that we certainly don't see in Nora's accounts, right?
Okay, I could go downstairs and get a first edition of Nora's biography, The Medical Discoveries of Edward Bach.
Uh-huh.
And somewhere about 2/3 of the way through that book, Nora says, and when Bach died, she wrote in 1940, when Dr. Bach died, he left the work to 3 of his colleagues, Victor Tabor, Mary Tabor, and Nora Weeks, right? So in the first edition, she acknowledges Mary Tabor as being one of the people who, if you like, inherited the work. But in the second edition, which I think came a couple of years later, Mary Tabor's name has been taken out.
Mm-hmm.
Now, the reason that Dr. Bach went to live in, not Wallingford, but Sotwell, is because Mary Tabor had a house there called the Wellsprings.
Mm-hmm.
And actually, when he was living in Sotwell, he spent a lot of his time at the Wellsprings. And actually, the Wellsprings, Mary Tabor's address, was given as his residence when he went to hospital and died, because he had a recurrence of his cancer. And, well, what can you say? He was obviously in some kind of relationship with both of them at different times of his life, and there must have been a falling out. But although we've tried to track this down and trace it, nothing has really come to light as to who Mary Tabor was or where she went to or what happened afterwards. However, she did write To Thine Own Self Be True. And actually, Mary gave to Nora Weeks the copyright of To Thine Own Self Be True in her will. But what do I think of the book? I think it's a romance. It's very hard to be sure about Bach and what he was really like. But then that's true of almost anybody, unless you have contemporary records and accounts, which you can really rely on. That he was very attractive to and attracted by young women, there's no doubt. I mean, Nora Weeks was not his contemporary. She was in her 20s. So when they got together, when did they get together? Nora Weeks says it's quite early on, but actually from somebody that I know who knows a lot more about this than I do, no, it was quite late on. So we don't really know. And although to some people this is the most attractive thing about the whole subject, to understand the relationships, I have to say that to me it has very, very little significance. But then that may be because it's me. Other people, I mean, I know some Spanish-speaking people who think that this is the subject that everybody ought to read books about, but I don't. I think the more important aspect of Bach and his work was his experience in researching medicine, which started at an early stage because when he left training and during the First World War, he was researching into medicine and he developed what are called the Bach nosodes. You know about them? Okay, the nosodes are made homeopathically, and that's how he got involved with reading Hahnemann, and that was a major, major influence on all of his thinking and ideas. And actually, he only abandoned homeopathy. He gave that absolutely scandalous talk called Ye Suffer From Yourselves, and he talks about, come a little further along the road. Hahnemann was okay, but he didn't really understand things. And of course, he lost all his friends for that, or nearly all of them. But that was what he was guided to do, rightly or wrongly. I mean, if you look at it from a practical point of view, you would say the guy was nuts. Except he wasn't, was he? Because, I mean, from my point of view, I spent the last 40 years working with this, and I'm not that easily misled. But what was he doing in his personal life? I don't know. And as I say, personally, I don't want to know. I think there are some nice things in Mary Tabor's book, but you've got a very luxurious society of upper middle class or aristocratic people who can live in country houses. They've all got servants and they all play tennis, and this is not the real world. And particularly in the 1930s, when you've got to think that the rise of fascism, not just in Germany, and the genocide that was about to take place, not just in Germany, and he died in 1936 before that really hit the fire. But I'd be very surprised if he didn't know about it, because it was public information. I don't know where I'm going with this, but I don't know. I don't know with Bach. He was certainly part of the educated elite, medically speaking. I mean, he was friends with, I can't remember his name, but who was actually a homeopathic doctor to the king in the UK. So he was very well connected at certain times. And yet he also, we're told, actually enjoyed a pint down the pub with the fisherman in Cromer. So, who knows?
Yeah. Thank you. This is a beautiful account, and I've really enjoyed your storytelling, Julian. I know everyone else has. We are so grateful for this experience and for meeting you.
Well, it's been a pleasure. Thank you very much for your time. And if you ever feel like a trip over to the UK, then please come to Waterstone and have a look around. And I don't know what you're going to do with Bach Flower Remedies, but I wish you well with your work, and I hope that it brings you interesting and rewarding experience in terms of knowledge and helping people and common welfare.
Thank you. Thank you, Julian.
Thank you.
And I want to
Thank
say,
you.
if there is any way that we can support your work now or in the future, please let us know.
Well, that's very kind of you. I'll bear that in mind. If, I get into trouble again, I'll let you know. But I
Hopefully
think the
not
best
today.
way to support the work is to give freedom and share knowledge and let it be known where, if you like, what the tradition is. Because Bach was part of a tradition. He wasn't just kind of born into this life and happened to be interested in medicine. I mean, who knows where he came from? I mean, maybe you believe in reincarnation, maybe you don't, it doesn't really matter. But he was certainly part of what we call the great tradition, which, earlier today in Brazil, there was somebody talking about the connectedness between what I was talking about with Jung. But undoubtedly, Bach would have known the work of Jung. And it seems quite likely that he would have at least had some connection with Rudolf Steiner. And all the people who were living through the 1920s, who were, many of them, in Britain at that time or Western Europe. So you've got the influence. I mean, I'm just going to reel off names now. Maybe they mean something to you, maybe they don't. But with Gurdjieff and Ouspensky, Rodney Collin, and actually, one of the most important people who came from India just after he was on the first boat, public boat, to leave India after the First World War. And he came to England and then he went to America, was Paramahansa Yogananda. Have you heard of him? Well, essentially, he brought yoga to the West. And these were people, and at a time of massive influence coming from the Orient, if you like, into Western civilization. And it was a time of massive, huge explosion of ideas and development, which most of it was actually destroyed by the Second World War. And after the Second World War, the coming of materialism, as opposed to essential human values and community. And that's the thing that we now need to rebuild. So you asked me, what's my energy and what's my attention? Remember the question? That's my purpose, is to draw you into that, not to draw it to me, but into the common life of where we can share these with our own friends and our own communities and value the common goal of belief in what? The natural world and the value of knowledge and the wisdom of self-fulfillment in an altruistic way. I know that you understand what I'm saying, so I don't need to supply the words. Okay? I mean, it's pouring down with rain here now, which is very welcome. But what I'm talking about is like the rain that falls. And it falls everywhere, and without it, we are dead. So that's the living force of existence for me. And that's where the sanctity comes, not localized in the church, but everywhere. And even in the desert. I mean, I've been in the Atacama Desert, and it's one of the most extraordinary places in Chile, if you know it. It's absolutely mind-blowing. Oh, it was for me. So is that enough? Okay. Yeah, thank you.
Wonderful.
Thank you.
And well, I'm sure you're going to work together as a group more in the future.
Yeah.
I'm reluctant to say goodbye.
Oh, wonderful. It's really been a pleasure. What a great gift you've given us.